The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're going to be having a slightly abbreviated bonus show today. We had what I would call the yearly tech disaster that happens every once in a while, roughly once a year, every 6 months maybe, today, which is 5 minutes before the interview we were scheduled to tape today. Our Skype mainframe was not working. We realized there was an updated version of the software that runs it, not regular Skype, but a special enterprise and hardware Skype that we have. That version happened to work in a completely different way than the previous version. None of us knew how to use it.
No.
And it's been quite a scramble today. So anyway, a slightly shorter bonus show today, but we'll be back to full strength next week. Few interesting stories for you. Number one, why do schools start so early? At least high school, or at least one school in most school districts starts really early. Interestingly, a lot of it has to do with bus schedules, where in order to use the same buses, very often for elementary, middle, and high school, you can't have all of those schools starting at the same time. So very often, school starts really early. My high school started at 7:25 a.m. or 7:35 a.m. when I went there. They've moved it back since to, I think, 8:05 a.m. In any case, Rand Corporation did a study which found that letting kids sleep in a little more, not starting any school before 8:30, could save $9 billion a year. And that $9 billion in savings would have a lot to do with many different aspects of what would happen if kids get up later. Part of it has to do with higher suicide rates, obesity, and mental health issues from too little sleep among kids. Other parts of it has to do with it's still dark out in much of the country. If you have to get up to be at school by 7:35, you're going to be getting ready in the dark and thus using more lights, which uses fossil fuels for electricity, etc. That would be another aspect to the savings. So there would be some pretty significant savings to be had by starting school a little bit later, no earlier than 8:30 a.m.
You know, in my experience going to this bus schedule thing, the high schoolers would start first, and then the middle schoolers maybe an hour later.
Correct.
Elementary school maybe an hour after that. Where I always thought that they should flip it entirely, because you think little kids are more likely to get up early in the morning.
I
Some
always
get
thought
up
the
at
same
6,
thing.
6 a.m., whereas high school kids want to sleep in all day.
Yeah.
And, you know, can't do it all day, but if you start school at 9:30, they'll be more attentive to what's going on.
I never understood it, and I know that there is some explanation for why it's not done that way. I always thought it would be most logical to have the youngest kids start first, and then the older you are, the later you start. But I think part of it has to do with once you get into high school, you have team sports. And because of the practice time, if you have school, like at my high school, it was 7:35 to 2:05, I think was our schedule. You can have practice at 2:30, and then the students can actually be done by 3:30. Whereas if you move the start of high school to 9 or 9:30, all of a sudden practices might not be done till it's actually already dark out, at least in the northeast of the U.S. in the winter. And then it throws off the whole day further. I think that was part of the justification.
And if you have games or meets, of course, those involve other schools as well. So you'd have to get the whole district or the whole surrounding areas on board with it too. But I think that's a movement that you can get them behind, because these kids, they would do much better, I think, if they were able to start the day later. And there's also a good amount of studies that show that kids really, in high school age, have a tough time falling asleep. At, maybe 10, 11 o'clock, they need to fall asleep a little bit later. So if you have to get up for school the next day, then you're not getting the full night's rest.
Long story short, everything I've read suggests that the time of high the high school day is counter to a lot of logic, including what appears to be sort of the natural scheduled inclinations for the average high schooler at that age.
And the problem is, I mean, I think people just look at them and say that they're lazy and that they're complaining too much for having to get up in the morning. But there could actually be some scientific reasons for why it's struggle to get out of bed.
Part of the reason why I do this and not teach high school is I don't like the early hours of high school. Not to mention I also have no training in being a teacher whatsoever. And yet somehow I'm teaching at Boston College. But that's a story for a different day.
We won't talk about that.
We won't talk about that. We talked earlier in the week about, I thought that there were some stores that were no longer offering bags when you go and buy stuff. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, you have to pay for paper bags. No plastic bags are allowed at all. There are a bunch of stores that are going in the direction of zero waste, and I now actually know about some of them. So, for example, Bulk Market, which I believe is in London, East London specifically, they sell all sorts of stuff, everything from dry foods, rice, dog food, cakes. They do catering, whatever. They have no bags or anything that the customer would get home and throw out at all. And even if you actually want to get rice, you have to bring your own container to put the rice in. They don't even have like smaller containers that you would put your rice in. They are trying to go into the total zero waste paradigm.
So what about like milk? I mean, do you have to bring your own jar and get it from this big dispenser thing?
You just put it in your pocket.
Oh, okay.
You just pour it right into your pocket. Yeah. No, I don't know about milk. I don't know about milk.
Napoleon Dynamite, where he just puts the tater tots in his pocket.
I think you have to bring a glass bottle of your own, and you carry the milk around in that or something like that. Yes, so it's very, very interesting, and there are actually a number of stores that are considering doing this, and the argument is recycling is really not enough because not everybody recycles. It depends on a lot of factors. Sometimes the energy required to recycle something versus just put it in a landfill is actually bigger, so you actually have a larger carbon footprint for recycling some percentage of the materials. I mean, it's crazy. I've actually done a lot of research into the economics of recycling, and it's amazing how a lot of the benefit is that it feels good, but it doesn't actually have the economic and environmental benefit that some people believe that it has. So this is the next step, which is let's not generate the waste with all the packaging in the first place.
It seems like it'll work for these small-scale grocery stores, these mom-and-pop places, but can you scale that up to some giant grocery stores?
I don't know.
You know, then every company that produces products in packaging have to change their game plan completely, right?
Yeah.
They have to send it out to these grocery stores in big containers, and people will come along and take smaller portions.
I think it'd be tough to do like that. I think that would be tough. And again, but at the same time, these stores aren't saying that the suppliers can't bring them items in packaging. They just are not involving any packaging in the transfer from them to the end consumer.
Okay.
They're probably still getting pallets and whatever it is that the products come packaged in.
So if there's like nuts or like cereal,
Yep.
that's the sort of thing that you dispense from these dispensers?
I believe so. I believe so. It's pretty interesting. You could just offer bags, reusable bags that you have to buy. Like, yeah, we have bags, but we only offer reusable bags, and you've got to buy it. And usually they're kind of overpriced.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Do you bring your own bags when you go grocery shopping?
I'd never have the foresight, but also I do the European thing, and I only grab a couple items at a time.
Really?
So oftentimes I don't even need a bag.
Wow.
If I do it, I shell it to 10 cents for a paper bag.
I tend to do the grocery shopping once a week. And that's good. I know some people go and they stock up a huge cart and it's just full. I never have that. I always have a basket, but I can still get through about a week. Plus with the stuff I get from Amazon Fresh, I'm usually good.
I have a really tough time planning ahead. So if I'm not hungry, I won't go grocery shopping.
Wow.
But also if I am hungry, I'll only buy what I want, because how am I supposed to know what I'm going to be in the mood for in the next few days?
Yeah.
I just can't think like that.
You're going to want to figure out how to not do that, because that is how you end up, number one, buying a lot of stuff you don't need and spending way more than you really could be spending.
You think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You got to make a meal plan. Make a meal plan. Got to do it. Okay, this is a bizarre story. 3 foreign nationals from India were arrested over the weekend after police officers found a woman who had been beaten and her child who was being held inside of her home. Apparently, 33-year-old Silky Gaind was beaten by her husband and his parents, who reportedly flew in from India in order to participate in the beating. It seems it's not a funny story. It's an incredibly tragic story, but it seems like a story that would be satirical or at least fake.
It's like you go through customs and you ask,
what's the purpose?
What's the purpose for
business
your
or
travel?
pleasure?
Yeah.
A little bit of both, or I don't know how to even answer that. I don't really know. Absolutely and totally nuts. And the investigation found that the parents came in for what they call counsel and discipline, and that it was at the son's request. In other words, their son was with, I don't know if it was, I believe they were legally married still. The son said, I need you to fly in from India to help me beat my wife and lock up my kid. And it all started with an argument. I do not know what to make of such a story. I know that domestic violence, there are people who, I don't know how anyone would get into this mindset, but there are people who justify domestic violence as sort of part of the disciplined relationship that exists between, typically they say between a man and a woman. I don't know how you get into that mindset where you rationalize the husband having to impose discipline on a woman in a physical, it's just crazy. Yeah. I don't get it. I'll never get it.
Maybe a little bit more easy to understand with like a parent-child relationship, but I mean, at least in the West, we think of men and women as equals, right? So hard to think of that way.
But are you defending spanking?
No.
You're not. Oh, okay. You're
No,
just
no,
saying
no.
that
I'm just saying it's a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah, how someone would get into that mindset. Yeah, I guess you're right. Whereas spanking is more seen as an outdated practice that some still support. The idea of beating your significant other in order to impose good behavior. It reminds me of honor killings, which sometimes exist, although that's not at all what we're talking about. And typically I don't think that honor killings in India, I might be speaking out of turn, but I don't think honor killings are ever connected to India. There are Middle Eastern countries where a family sometimes, in order to preserve honor, kills a family member when they've done something that typically in the eyes of some arbitrary sacred text is dishonorable to the family. It's absolutely disgusting and vile. I mean, it's up there with the child brides and whatever most heinous practices you can think of. Okay, that's it. That's it for the bonus show. We are going to try to get our tech issues sorted out and start next week off with a bang. And by that I mean absolutely no technical mishaps of any kind. Something to aim for.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.